Hello and welcome. I am Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. Donald Trump has suggested that it could take ownership of power plants in Ukraine to ensure their security. This comes after a direct discussion between the US President and Volodymyr Zelensky. Reports out of Gaza say that at least 40 people have been killed in a strike in the north and south of the region. This comes after Israel said it will commence combat with full force. Later today, Britain is set to host a closed meeting of senior military officials from the coalition of the willing. The objective is to draw up plans for a proposed peacekeeping force for Ukraine. Ukraine's Air Force reports that Russia has launched 171 drones over its territory overnight. This is the latest in a series of near-daily attacks by Russia. The escalation comes after Russia claims it destroyed 132 drones overnight amid ongoing ceasefire negotiations. Canadian authorities have confirmed that China has executed 4 of its citizens on drug-related charges. Canada's foreign minister has condemned the killings, calling them inconsistent with human dignity. China has said it acted in accordance with the law. Yemen's Houthi group claims responsibility for a ballistic missile fired at Israel, which was intercepted. The IDF says that there are no injuries reported and that the missile was stopped before entering the country. Protests erupt in Buenos Aires as Argentina's Congress approves Milei's new IMF loan. Crowds gather in greater numbers than last week's demonstrations, which left 45 people injured. Starting off now with a major development. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has agreed to a partial ceasefire with Russia following a phone call with US President Donald Trump. The agreement, primarily focusing on energy and infrastructure targets, comes after Trump's recent conversation with Russian President Vladimir Putin. White House spokesperson Caroline Leavitt confirmed that Trump briefed Zelensky on his discussion with Putin, emphasizing the importance of halting strikes on energy and infrastructure while broader ceasefire talks continue. Here's what she said in the press conference.
First, I'd like to reiterate what the president said earlier following his call with President Zelensky this morning. He said he just completed a very good telephone call with President Zelensky. It lasted approximately 1 hour. Much of the discussion was based on the call made yesterday with President Putin in order to align both Russia and Ukraine in terms of their requests and needs. We are very much on track. President Trump also asked President Zelensky about the children who had gone missing from Ukraine during the war, including the ones that had been abducted. And President Trump promised to work closely with both parties to help make sure those children were returned home. They agreed all parties must continue the effort to make a ceasefire work.
Trump and Zelensky acknowledged that this partial ceasefire could be a critical first step towards achieving a full cessation of hostilities and lasting peace. Zelensky described the call as positive, frank and substantive, expressing hope that Trump's leadership could be finally within reach. Technical teams from the US and Ukraine are set to meet in Saudi Arabia in the coming days to further align strategies. President Zelensky later released a video talking about his discussions with President Trump. Here's what he said.
А сьогодні ніякого тиску я не відчував з боку президента Трампа, його не було. І це факт. Далі, ви знаєте, що я людина відкрита, якщо б це було, я б сказав би відверто. Президент запитав, а якщо буде розуміння, що Америка може це відновити. Я йому сказав так, якщо можна модернізувати, вкладати гроші тощо. Ми готові це обговорювати з вами. Але ми говорили виключно про одну станцію, яка знаходиться під тимчасовою окупацією Росії.
Another key point discussed was Ukraine's energy infrastructure, including its nuclear power plants. Trump proposed leveraging American expertise to support the operation and security of Ukraine's power facilities, even suggesting that US ownership could offer the best long-term protection. This idea reflects ongoing concerns about safeguarding critical infrastructure amid continued conflict. Here's what he said about the deal.
Президент запитав, а якщо буде розуміння, що Америка може це відновити, я йому сказав так, якщо можна модернізувати, вкладати гроші тощо, ми готові це обговорювати з вами. Але ми говорили виключно про одну станцію, яка знаходиться під тимчасовою окупацією Росії.
On the other hand, Russia has launched a massive drone assault on Ukraine, deploying 171 unmanned aerial vehicles overnight. Ukrainian air defences successfully intercepted 75 of these drones, while electronic warfare measures caused 63 to deviate from their intended targets. The city of Kropyvnytsk was the hardest hit, with at least 10 people injured, including 4 children. Residential buildings suffered extensive damage, marking one of the most severe attacks on the city to date. This assault comes just hours after Russian President Vladimir Putin assured US President Donald Trump of a commitment to hold strikes on energy infrastructure, raising doubts about Russia's intentions amid ongoing ceasefire efforts. The contradiction between Russia's promises and its actions has drawn strong international condemnation. Following the attack, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is expected to speak with President Trump to seek clarification and discuss further steps. Trump had previously announced a partial ceasefire agreement with Putin, focusing on energy and infrastructure, but the latest developments put that truce in jeopardy. Meanwhile, amid the escalating tensions, a significant prisoner of war exchange took place between Ukraine and Russia. Both countries released 175 prisoners of war, marking one of the largest swaps since the conflict began. Notably, Russia included an additional 22 severely wounded soldiers in the exchange. Zelensky expressed relief over the return of Ukrainian soldiers, describing the swap as a critical step towards addressing humanitarian concerns. Moving on now, Britain is hosting a closed meeting on Thursday with senior military leaders from over 20 nations in the coalition of the willing. This is to discuss plans for a Western-led peacekeeping force for Ukraine. The meeting, led by Britain and France, will take place at the UK's permanent joint headquarters in Northwood. Armed Forces Minister Luke Pollard said the coalition aims to be a credible force to help Ukraine secure lasting peace and rearm. Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer is expected to attend after visiting Barrow, where he will lay the keel of a new nuclear-armed submarine. Moving to the Middle East now, where Israel overnight airstrikes have killed at least 40 Palestinians across the Gaza Strip, according to 3 hospitals. The strikes targeted homes in the cities of Khan Yunis and Rafah in southern Gaza, as well as the northern town of Beit Lahia. Israel blames Hamas for rejecting repeated offers to release hostages, while Hamas accuses Prime Minister Netanyahu of breaking the truce and endangering the hostages. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz warned Gazans to release hostages and remove Hamas, saying the alternative is total destruction and devastation. This is what he said.
תחזירו את החטופים ותסלקו את החמאס ויפתחו לכם אופציות אחרות, כולל יציאה למקומות אחרים בעולם למי שירצה. האלטרנטיבה היא הרס וחורבן מוחלט.
We are now joined by Professor Rohan Gunaratne, Middle East expert, to discuss this further. Thank you very much for joining us, Professor Gunaratne. First of all, I was willing, what What was the primary factors? This ceasefire was obviously very fragile from the start, but what were the primary factors that led to the collapse of the agreed January ceasefire between Hamas and Israel?
Hamas did not release the hostages. Hamas stopped releasing the hostages. And as a result, IDF decided to do airstrikes, and now they have launched ground operations. It is now the responsibility of Hamas to release the hostages. In fact, right now, the negotiators are desperately trying to restore the ceasefire by persuading Hamas to start releasing the hostages. Prime Minister Netanyahu has instructed that Israeli troops move and dominate Gaza, and the Israeli Minister of Defense has said that their campaign will be more intense this time than on the previous occasion. So if the Arab and the Muslim leaders are serious of saving Palestinian civilian lives, this is the time for them to appeal to Hamas to disarm and to surrender. At least they should ask Hamas to release the hostages. If they do not do that, IDF will continue to operate and dominate in Gaza, and eventually, I repeat, will annex Gaza. Gaza will be permanently lost to the Palestinian community, and a part of that responsibility will be the Muslim and the Arab leaders, because they didn't do enough to persuade Hamas to release the hostages and to disarm and surrender.
Professor Gunaratne, obviously this has gained international attention mainly because of the humanitarian crisis that is currently going on in the Gaza Strip. Israel has blockaded Gaza from getting any humanitarian aid. Can you describe some of the conditions that the people of Gaza, the Palestinians, are currently facing?
The people in Gaza are in a terrible plight, but this plight has been created by the Hamas attack, October 7th, 2023. Hamas has to take full responsibility for this situation, because if not for the Hamas massacre in October of 2023, this situation would not have arisen. And even the most recent IDF decision to intervene in Gaza is a direct consequence of Hamas' reluctance to release those hostages.
Professor Gunaratne, the international outrage is mainly due to the fact that the civilians of Gaza are being affected. These people are not fighting. And Israel brought in this blockade at the start of March. And these people have nearly now had 2 weeks without any humanitarian aid that are already in dire consequences. Is this a necessary policy for Israel to do to enforce this blockade and stop essential goods from traveling into the Gaza Strip and reaching the people that really need it?
Israel's approach has been criticized globally because the international community is of the firm view that the Palestinian civilians should not suffer. And at this point, what is important is for Egypt, for Qatar, and other negotiating partners, those who have the capacity to influence both the Gazans and the Hamas, to work towards a more permanent solution, that is releasing the hostages. The Israelis will continue to dominate Gaza Strip and is planning to annex Gaza. This is their next phase. And the only way that this matter can be resolved is for Hamas to start to release the hostages and to surrender, because now Israel has gone beyond the point of even asking for the hostages. They want Hamas to dismantle.
Professor Gunaratne, I want to now talk about the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. Domestically, Netanyahu faces pressure from both the Israeli right and also the families of the hostages, as well as the people of Israel who want to see these hostages freed, they think that maybe the actions of the IDF might put the lives of these hostages in jeopardy. How is this influencing his decision making, and could it push him towards further military action rather than a negotiated settlement?
Most of the Israeli people do not want IDF to take military action at this phase. They want all the hostages to be released, and even the remains of those hostages to be returned back to the Israeli families. But that has not happened because the Prime Minister Netanyahu is determined to fight to dismantle Hamas. But the intelligence assessment is that every Hamas member that has been killed has been replaced by Palestinians who are sufficiently radicalized to joining Hamas. But Netanyahu is now under very significant pressure, especially because he asked the Shin Bet, the Internal Security Service Chief, Ron Barr, has to resign. He has fired him. So Netanyahu is also facing a huge domestic challenge. And one way of him overcoming this challenge is to increase the military pressure on Hamas, because that is the ultimate strategic calculus of Israel. That is to have a Gaza where Hamas doesn't exist.
Yes. Thank you very much, Rohan Gunaratne. Please stay with us. We now move to some more news updates from the Middle East. Israel's military has intercepted a missile launched by Yemen's Houthi rebels as the United States intensifies airstrikes against Yemen. The Houthis claimed responsibility for what it said was a ballistic missile fired in support of Palestinians and in response to Israel's renewed bombardment of Gaza, which has killed almost 500 people in the Strip amid ceasefire talks. As per reports, the missile was intercepted before it entered Israeli territory, and no injuries were immediately reported. The Houthis said the missile targeted Ben Gurion International Airport, Israel's main aviation hub on the outskirts of Tel Aviv. The Houthis, whose drone and missile attacks on the Red Sea shipping have significantly impacted global trade since late 2023, earlier said they will continue their assaults on American and Israeli interests until hostilities cease in Gaza. The group had paused its attacks when the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas was declared in January. Dozens of people have been reported to be killed in Yemen since Trump ordered decisive military action against the Houthis late last week. We are once again joined by Professor Rohan Gunaratne to discuss this further. Professor, can you tell me why the Houthis and Hamas have this relationship? Why has the Houthi rebels launched this missile attack towards Israel in response to these strikes in Gaza?
Houthis are steadfastly supporting the position of Iran. That is, Iran is the patron both of the Houthi movement and Hamas. And Iran has provided the missile capabilities to the Houthis. They fired that missile at the instigation of Iran. And the Houthis have also threatened Israeli shipping and American and Western shipping. That is why the United States have launched attacks against Houthi targets. And as a result of this threat from the Houthis, 40,000 Israelis had to go to their bunkers, their safe places, when the missile was fired. Fortunately, this missile was intercepted. But what is important to understand is that the conflict in Gaza has very significant implications, meaning the Houthis are threatening to attack the Red Sea. Already in the Red Sea, there is a war where the Houthis are targeting even American shipping. And what is important is for for the United States also to work with Iran to stop assistance to the Houthis. As long as Iran directs and capacitates the Houthis will continue to fire missiles towards Israel, and also cripple the Red Sea shipping that is going to have an impact on global trade and global shipping. Already the insurance costs have gone up. The ship operators are they're sending their ships across the Cape and not through the Suez Canal.
Professor Gunaratne, what does this intercepted airstrike say both about Israel's military capabilities and also the Houthi military capabilities? And as you were talking about before, where does Iran and the US fall into this situation?
Israelis are very competent, but in the case of this particular missile strike, we have seen that the missile was intercepted before it entered Israeli airspace. So there are other countries with other capabilities that are helping Israel at this point. And I believe that as long as Israel maintains those alliances with those Arab countries, as well as with the United States, Israel will be protected, because 40,000 civilians, there were sirens in Israel, and 40,000 people left their homes and sought shelter. So the Houthi movement should be dismantled. In fact, if it is not dismantled, at least Iran should be informed, look, if the Houthis attack, you will be held responsible.
Professor Rohan Gunaratne, thank you very much for joining us. We now move to some news updates to the United States. According to multiple reports, President Trump is set to sign an executive order on Thursday to shut down the Department of Education, fulfilling a key campaign promise. The move faces immediate legal challenges even before it was signed. The order was being challenged by a group of Democratic state attorney general who filed a lawsuit seeking to block Trump from dismantling the department and halt the layoff of nearly half its staff. Trump will direct his Education Secretary, Linda McMahon, to take all necessary steps to facilitate the closure of the Department of Education and return education to authority or to the states. According to a White House summary of the order, it also calls for the uninterrupted delivery of services, programs, and benefits which only Americans rely. Staying in the US now, President Trump urged the US Federal Reserve on Wednesday to cut interest rates to help offset effects of his tariffs, renewing his vocal disagreements with the central bank's decision-making. Trump demanded in a post on his Truth Social site to do the right thing hours after the FED decided to hold rates steady while reducing its growth forecast and hiking its inflation outlook. The Federal Reserve has penciled in 2 rate cuts this year, but Chairman Jerome Powell noted that uncertainty today is unusually elevated and that inflation is ticking up. Let's take a look at what US Federal Reserve Chair said.
Ahead, the new administration is in the process of implementing significant policy changes in 4 distinct areas: trade, immigration, fiscal policy, and regulation. It is the net effect of these policy changes that will matter for the economy and for the path of monetary policy. While there have been recent developments in some of these areas, especially trade policy, uncertainty around the changes and their effects on the economic outlook is high.
Reportedly, experts have warned that the tariffs, which are being met with trade retaliation by some countries, threaten to possibly tip the US economy and others into a recession. Trump has admitted that the economy may suffer a little disturbance as his planned levies take hold, but that America is otherwise on the cusp of a golden age. Moving to Europe now, the 27 leaders of the European Union are gathering in Brussels for a summit with a remarkably busy agenda. The topics to lead the talks will be the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war, the negotiations launched by Donald Trump, and new multi-billion plans to rearm the bloc. The meeting will also address the need to boost competitiveness. the management of irregular migration, the situation in the Middle East, the multilateral order, and the future of the EU budget, which is under severe strain after years of successive crises. The summit is expected to shape key EU and policies and strategies as Europe faces significant political and economic challenges. Ahead of the summit, French far-right leader Marine Le Pen, French National Rally President Jordan Bardella, and Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban held a pre-summit meeting in Brussels. Let's take a look at what they had to say.
Je ne peux que me réjouir lorsque des dirigeants se mettent autour d'une table pour parler de la paix. Surtout quand le président français, lui, ne cesse de parler de la guerre. Voilà. Donc j'espère que ceux qui parlent de la paix arriveront à conclure avant ceux qui parlent de la guerre.
Not there yet at this moment. What we have done now, we changed the constitution saying that the basic rights of the kids to have the proper growing up and education is the most important value, which is well ahead of all the other basic rights of the citizens of Hungary. So that's what we have done, which could be a basis to ban anything which is against the interest of the children. So what we are doing is...
Moving on, Swedish government officials are to meet food industry giants on Thursday to discuss soaring food costs and rising consumer anger in the Nordic country. Food prices rose by 3.9% in February from the same month a year earlier, the highest annual rate in 2 years, according to the country's official statistics agency. Dairy products are among those with the highest increases. The price of butter has gone up 26% in a year, while milk and cheese have also risen, according to the statistics agency. Finance Minister Elisabeth Svantesson and Rural Affairs Minister Peter Kullgren will meet the main supermarket chains ICA, Co-op and Axfood on Thursday to listen to the industry's assessment of the situation and work together to lower prices for consumers, according to the government. Protests have erupted across Turkey after the detention of Istanbul's mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu, a leading opposition figure and potential presidential candidate. İmamoğlu from the secular Republican People's Party was arrested on corruption and terrorism charges, which he and his supporters deny. Police detained 100 people, including politicians, journalists and businessmen, as authorities imposed 4 days of restrictions in Istanbul. Despite the crackdown, thousands of protesters gathered, chanting anti-government slogans and clashing with police, who used pepper spray to disperse the crowds. İmamoğlu vowed to stand resolute for democracy, calling the charges part of a conspiracy against him. His party condemned the arrest as a coup against our next president, raising concerns over Turkey's shift towards autocracy. President Erdogan's government denies political motives, insisting Turkey's judiciary is independent. But European Union remains tense. This is what the EU Commission President said.
Thank you. So we think that the arrest of the mayor is deeply concerning. As a Council of Europe member that Turkey is and an EU candidate country, Turkey must uphold the democratic values, especially the rights of elected.
Canadian nationals executed in China's execution of 4 Canadian citizens for drug offences has drawn strong condemnation from Canada. Foreign Minister Mélanie Joly called for leniency, citing the family's privacy concerns. China defended the executions, highlighting its zero-tolerance policy on drug crimes and stressing its commitment to legal fairness and non-discrimination. The move further strains already tense Canada-China relations, which have been deteriorating since 2018, when Canada detained a Chinese telecom executive, prompting China to retaliate by detaining 2 Canadians. Tensions have worsened over issues like alleged Chinese interference in Canadian elections, Hong Kong's crackdown and the treatment of Uyghur Muslims. China's use of the death penalty remains opaque, with Amnesty International estimating thousands of executions annually. Let's take a look at what Chinese Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Mao Ning said.
打击毒品犯罪是各国共同的责任。中国是法治国家， 对不同国籍的被告人一视同仁，严格依法公正处理，依法保障当事人的合法权利和加拿大方面的领事权利。加方应当尊重法治精神，停止干涉中国的司法主权。
Staying in the Indo-Pacific, Taiwan will conduct its annual Hanguang War Games from the 19th of July to the 18th, simulating Chinese invasion scenarios projected for 2027 amid ongoing military pressure from China. The Defense Ministry aims to enhance troop readiness and quick response capabilities. Defense Minister Wellington Koo warned that China's shift from exercises to combat could be quicker than expected, urging vigilance. Taiwan also held a 5-day rapid response exercise to sharpen military decision-making. These drills coincide with China's intense grey zone tactics, including over 50 Chinese aircrafts in joint patrols around Taiwan. The tensions escalated after President Lai Chang-te labelled China a foreign hostile force, with Beijing blaming US support and Taiwan and warning against Taiwan's independence efforts. Facebook and Instagram parent company Meta has said it would launch its generative artificial intelligence assistant Meta AI in the European Union this week, more than a year after the service's US release. Meta AI was first unveiled for the US in September 2023 and then rolled out across all the group's applications in April 2024. Although image generation is available in the US, in the EU, the generative AI tool will only craft text responses to users' questions. Meta AI can also draw on web searches for its answers. Developing large language models like Meta AI requires vast reserves of data, which is heavily regulated in the European Union, where it relates to individual users. A large group of activists gathered outside SpaceX's office to protest recent federal cuts announced by the Trump administration. The demonstration, which blocked traffic in front of the aerospace company, was a result of mounting frustration over the government's layoffs. The protest was followed by a march. Other Doge-related protest efforts gathered steam earlier this month. On the 1st of March, thousands of people gathered at national parks across the country to protest the Trump administration's firing of 1,000 full-time National Park Service staff. 2 days later, more than 1,000 protesters gathered outside a National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration building in the Boulder, Colorado, decrying Trump administration layoffs at the agency. Here is what one of the members of the Los Angeles Alliance for a New Economy had to say.
We're here to say that enough is enough. Right now we have corporate billionaires who have hijacked our democracy and are trying to change the government to further enrich themselves. And we have communities here day in and day out that are struggling to make ends meet. And that's not what our government is supposed to be for. And so Elon Musk needs to step away. We need to stop dismantling the safety net that was built over the civil rights movement.
Philippine officials defended the arrest and transfer of the former President Rodrigo Duterte to the International Criminal Court before the country's Senate. They faced allegations that Duterte was illegally taken into custody at the request of a foreign institution. Duterte was arrested last week and sent to The Hague, where he faces charges of murder as a crime against humanity. The accusations stem from his controversial war on drugs, which left thousands dead during his presidency from 2016 to 2022. The government's decision to hand him over has sparked backlash from his supporters, family and allies. They have petitioned the Supreme Court, arguing that the arrest was illegal and that the ICC no longer has jurisdiction over the Philippines. Duterte appeared before the ICC's pre-trial chamber on March the 14th. He remains in ICC custody, with his next court appearance scheduled for September. Senator Amy Marcos, who chaired a televised Senate hearing, strongly opposed Duterte's transfer. Duterte's arrest comes after years of defiance against the ICC. Since the court began investigating allegations of extrajudicial killings, he has mocked it in profanity-laced speeches. In response, he withdrew the Philippines from the ICC's founding treaty. Duterte has admitted full responsibility for the deaths during his drug war. However, he denies leading a campaign of systematic murder, insisting that police were only ordered to kill in self-defense. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more international news updates.